A wounded German shepherd staggered out of the snowstorm, one leg dragging fur, burned and soaked with blood. He should not have survived. In a frozen mountain pass, steel cables had been used to trap him, part of a secret operation meant to erase every trace of what was done to him and others like him. Someone decided his life was disposable, but a former Navy SEAL did not walk away. No one believed a trained dog broken by pain and betrayal could feel gratitude, let alone loyalty beyond instinct. Then the explosion came. The facility was destroyed, and when the man fell in the snow, the dog did not run to freedom. He turned back into the fire and placed his own body between danger and the human who saved him. What happens next will make you cry and remind you that loyalty has no limits. Subscribe to the channel if you believe in second chances. Comment where you're watching from and share this story with someone who still believes miracles can walk on four paws. Snow fell sideways over Silverton, Colorado, smothering the mountains in white noise as the wind scraped the sky raw, turning the mining town's outskirts into a frozen corridor where mistakes traveled faster than mercy. Luke Hayes drove with both hands steady on the wheel, the way he had learned to keep them during his years as a Navy SEAL, when steadiness meant survival and hesitation meant names carved into stone. At 34, Luke carried the look of a man older than his years. Tall, broad-shouldered, built dense rather than bulky, with a frame shaped by cold mornings and heavier memories. His dark hair was cut short in military habit, already threaded with premature gray at the temples, and a rough beard shadowed a jawline sharp enough to look carved. A thin scar cut through his right eyebrow, a souvenir from Fallujah, and his eyes steel blue, constantly measuring, rarely softened, except when they turned toward the passenger seat. The war had left him quieter, less tolerant of noise and lies, but more loyal than ever to those who stood beside him when things went wrong. That seat belonged to Ranger, a 9-year-old German shepherd, whose black and tan coat had faded slightly at the muzzle, silver creeping in like frost. Ranger sat upright, ears alert, chest wide, a disciplined posture that never fully disappeared even after retirement from K-9 duty. His eyes were amber and intelligent, the kind that watched Luke not as an owner, but as a partner who had bled beside him. Ranger had a torn notch in his left ear from an IED blast outside Kandahar, an injury that ended his service and saved Luke's life. Since then, the dog moved with a subtle stiffness in his hind leg, but his presence radiated calm authority, the unspoken confidence of someone who had faced chaos and learned how to wait it out. Luke was heading up toward Blackwater Ridge to check a remote emergency relay station that had gone dark 2 days earlier. Officially, it was a county maintenance task. Unofficially, Luke didn't trust darkness that arrived early and stayed quiet. Silence, he'd learned, was rarely empty. The storm thickened as the truck climbed tires, grinding through fresh drifts, and Luke felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear, but anticipation, the old instinct waking up like a muscle that refused to forget its job. Ranger shifted suddenly, nose lifting, a low sound vibrating in his throat, not a growl more, a warning shaped by experience. Luke slowed. Headlights caught something unnatural ahead, thin metallic lines glinting between snow-laden pines stretched too evenly to be branches. Ranger's ears pinned forward. Luke stepped out into the wind, his boots sinking deep, the cold biting instantly through denim and bone. Up close, the lines resolved into steel cable anchored low and tight, some half-buried, some snapped and recoiled like frozen snakes. Whoever set them knew what they were doing. This wasn't hunting. This was containment. 10 yards downslope near a split boulder, something moved. Luke crouched, heart rate flattening into focus. Ranger advanced a step ahead, controlled, silent. In a shallow hollow lay another German shepherd, younger, maybe 3 years old, sable coat dulled by frost and blood. One hind leg was caught in a cable loop, skin torn raw beneath the wire. The dog's body trembled, but his eyes, dark sharp, never left Luke. There was no panic there, only pain and calculation. Luke noticed the collar, immediately black nylon reinforced with a stamped metal tag that read, "Property of Blackwater Ridge Lab." Luke swore under his breath, not loudly, not angrily, more like a prayer gone wrong. Ranger approached the trapped dog, slowly lowered his head and touched noses once, a brief exchange of breath and intent. The younger dog exhaled just slightly, as if conceding that the world had not ended yet. Luke worked the cable with practiced efficiency. Fingers numb but precise, cutting the tension, easing the steel away without jerking the injured leg. When the loop finally came free, the dog collapsed panting but didn't try to flee. Luke wrapped the leg with gauze from his truck kit, hands moving automatically, mind already building scenarios he didn't like. He glanced uphill toward the relay station obscured by swirling snow and felt the weight of an old truth settle back into his bones. Someone had built a system here, and systems always defended themselves. Ranger stood watch, broad body planted between Luke and the forest, while the injured dog leaned weakly against Luke's knee, accepting warmth like it had been owed all along. Luke looked at the collar again, then at the cables disappearing into the storm, and understood that this mission had just changed shape. He wasn't here to fix a signal anymore. He was here because walking away had never been an option. Not after the war, not after Ranger, and not now with another life caught in someone else's silence. Luke lifted the injured shepherd into the truck's rear with careful economy of motion, the way he once lifted wounded teammates under fire, keeping his body between danger and the fragile thing that needed time. The dog, lean, sable-coated ribs showing beneath winter fur, accepted the move with clenched restraint breath, shallow but steady. Luke drove the last mile uphill to the relay station through tightening snow. Ranger braced in the passenger seat, eyes tracking the tree line like a metronome set to threat. The station appeared as a low concrete block half buried in drifts, its antenna iced over red beacon dead. Luke felt the old pressure behind his sternum, the sense that silence wasn't absence, but intention. He cut the engine and listened. Wind, metal ticking as it cooled. No voices. He left Ranger with the injured dog, now wrapped and quiet, and took the short approach alone, rifle slung but safety on boots, placing themselves without thought. The door had been forced inward. The lock plate was peeled like cheap foil. Inside, the air smelled wrong solvent and cold steel, the tang of disinfectant layered over damp concrete. Luke's eyes adjusted. Racks stood empty where tools should have been. A desk had been cleared too neatly. That neatness was a tell. People in a hurry left chaos, professionals left blanks. Under the desk, Ranger would have found it instantly, but Luke found it by habit, an access panel where the dust pattern broke. He knelt, popped it, and slid the tray free. Files, not paper. Drives labeled in block print. Behavioral conditioning, K9. He didn't read everything. He didn't need to. Photos told the story fast enough. Muzzles, restraints, electrodes placed with clinical care. Conditioning logs written by someone who thought pain was a language dogs should learn. Luke's jaw set. He had learned pain as a language, too. It taught you exactly one thing: who you were when nobody was watching. A noise cut through the wind, engine pitch rising, then flattening. Luke moved to the window and saw a snowcat crest the lower slope, white paint, unmarked tracks clean. 3 figures, dismounted faces hidden by masks, movements efficient. Luke recognized the cadence immediately. Contractors, not locals. He retreated deeper mapped exits and signaled with a soft click that Ranger would hear even through the walls. Outside, Ranger answered with stillness. The men entered. One was tall and narrow-hipped, moving like a runner who never stopped. Another carried weight in his shoulders, beard visible under the mask, the sort of man who used mass as persuasion. The third hung back, scanning, eyes sharp above a scarf, hands steady. They spoke little. They went straight to the desk. Luke waited until they found the panel empty and felt the temperature in the room change. That was when he acted, not loud, not heroic. He moved past them into the storm-trusting Ranger to read the night. The chase spilled down slope where the wind erased footprints as fast as they were made. Ranger led body low, choosing paths that bled speed from the pursuers. The younger shepherd, still nameless, broke from the truck and joined them despite the injury teeth, finding a dangling cable on the snowcat as it lurched forward, wrenching it free with a snarl that was more anger than sound. A shot cracked. Luke felt the air move. He returned fire into nothing, just enough to keep heads down. Then the station went up, not a fireball, but a concussive thump that folded metal and spit snow into the dark. Luke hit the ground. Ranger over him, the younger dog thrown hard, yelping once. When Luke reached him, the dog's leg was worse. Breath-ragged eyes still locked on Luke's face as if waiting for instruction. "Stay," Luke said. Voice ironed flat, and the dog did, because some creatures recognized command as comfort. Sirens arrived later, distant and climbing. The men were gone. Luke loaded both dogs, hands shaking now that the moment had passed, and turned the truck toward town, understanding something he hadn't allowed himself to say, yet this wasn't a repair job, and it wasn't finished. Someone would come back for what they'd lost. And Luke Ranger and a dog who had chosen not to disappear were now part of the ledger. Morning came pale and hard-edged as Luke rolled into Durango before dawn, snow still clinging to the truck like a second skin, the radio murmuring closures and cautions he already knew by instinct. He parked behind a low, practical building with a flickering sign, Animas Valley Veterinary, and killed the engine, letting the sudden quiet ring. Inside the clinic smelled of antiseptic and wet wool. Dr. Sarah Whitman met him at the door without ceremony. She was in her early 40s, tall and spare, with an athlete's posture softened by long hours on her feet. Her hair, the color of dark honey, was pulled into a no-nonsense knot at the nape of her neck, a few strands already escaping. Her skin was fair and weathered in the way mountain people earned honestly. Sarah's eyes were green and steady, the kind that didn't flinch from pain but refused to romanticize it. She had grown up ranch adjacent and put herself through vet school after a winter avalanche took her brother's leg. Since then she carried patience like a tool and anger like a locked drawer. Ranger eased out, first dignified despite stiffness. Then Luke lifted the younger shepherd, now shivering blood dark against bandage, onto the gurney. Sarah's hands moved fast and sure, voice calm, as she called for fluids and x-rays, her tone making space for no argument. "You did right bringing him straight here," she said, not looking up, reading wounds like sentences. The dog's collar was still on. She noticed it immediately. "That lab tag," she said softly, and Luke heard the note shift. "I've seen that name once before, not like this." The x-rays showed fractures that would heal and nerve bruising that might with time. Sarah sedated the dog and worked stitching and setting with the practiced economy of someone who respected life by not wasting words. Luke watched the monitor's line rise and fall, the room buzzing with fluorescent hum, and felt the delayed tremor in his hands. Ranger sat sentinel near the wall, amber eyes following Sarah, then Luke, then the door, as if triangulating safety. When it was done, Sarah washed up and leaned back against the counter, crossing long arms, studying Luke now. "You look like a man who found something he wasn't supposed to," she said. Luke gave her the short version. He didn't give her names he didn't have. She nodded once. "He'll walk," she said of the dog. "Not today. Maybe not pretty, but he'll walk." Relief didn't soften Luke so much as re-weight him. He asked about boarding. Sarah shook her head. "He stays. I'll keep him quiet." Then she added, "But you should know someone called earlier asking if a lost K9 was brought in." Voice disguised. "Too careful." Luke's spine cooled. "Did you answer?" "I said no," Sarah replied, chin lifting. "I don't like bullies." Outside, sirens cut past. Deputy Mark Ellison came through the door minutes later. A man in his late 30s with a square jaw and a beard he trimmed out of habit rather than vanity. He moved with the stiffness of someone who'd broken bones and kept working. A logging accident years back had left him with a limp he refused to hide. Mark's eyes were brown and frank, his manner blunt, but not unkind, the sort who believed rules mattered because people did. Luke and Mark knew of each other. Small towns stacked familiarity whether you asked or not. Mark listened, hands on his belt, then glanced at the lab collar. Counties had complaints, he said. Noise trucks at odd hours. Nothing that stuck. He met Luke's gaze. "If they're cleaning house, they'll circle back." Sarah crossed the room and rested a hand briefly on the gurney rail, grounding herself. "Not here," she said. "Not while he's under my roof." Mark nodded a promise shaped like a jaw set firm. He stepped out to make calls. Luke leaned against the wall and finally named the younger dog out loud, the word, "Tasting right, Ghost." Ranger's ear flicked. Sarah looked at Luke, then at the dog, and allowed the smallest smile. By the time Luke left, snow had begun again, softer this time. He stood by the truck for a breath. Ranger pressed to his leg and felt the weight of what he'd stepped into settle like a pack he wouldn't set down. The ledger had new lines now, names, places of promise spoken under fluorescent light, and Luke knew the storm hadn't finished telling its story. Snow returned after midnight, quieter but heavier, blanketing Durango in a way that pressed sound flat and made every shadow feel intentional. Luke didn't sleep. He sat in the truck across from Animas Valley Veterinary, engine off, collar turned up, watching the darkened windows as if they might blink first. Ranger lay on the passenger seat, chin on paws, breathing slow, eyes open, his version of rest, since the war rewired what safe meant. Luke's phone vibrated once with a text from Deputy Ellison, Extra Patrols. "Thin, tonight weather's eating manpower." And Luke felt the answer settle before he typed back, "Copy." At 1:17 a.m., headlights swept the far end of the lot and cut out. A van idled without lights, shape low and ordinary, the most dangerous kind of forgettable. Two men stepped out. One was tall and narrow, long limbs, wrapped in a dark parka, movements precise like he'd learned efficiency before kindness. The other was compact and thick-necked, shaved head catching snow shoulders, rolling with the confidence of someone used to forcing doors. They didn't hurry. Luke's pulse slowed. He opened the door without sound. Ranger flowed down to the ground, silent tail, low eyes fixed. The men split, tall one, circling compact, one heading straight for the clinic's side entrance. Luke crossed the lot at an angle, wind covering his steps. The compact man produced a tool and leaned in. Luke closed the distance and spoke once, quiet and flat. "Step away." The man turned surprised, then smiled, a flash of teeth that said he'd decided Luke was manageable. Ranger stepped into the light, and that smile thinned. The tall man appeared behind Luke, raising something that hummed. Ranger moved first, body aligned, jaws clamping the forearm with a sound like a dropped wrench. The hum died. Luke struck once precise, and the compact man folded with a breathless grunt. Sirens rose in the distance, closer than Luke expected. The tall man tore free, leaving blood on snow, and ran. Luke didn't chase. He dragged the compact man into the light and waited, Ranger guarding with a quiet authority that felt older than commands. Deputy Ellison arrived with another cruiser, snow caking his beard, eyes sharp. "You all right?" he asked, already cuffing the man. Luke nodded once. Inside, Sarah stood barefoot in scrubs beneath her coat, hair fallen loose around her shoulders, green eyes bright and furious. She checked Ranger's mouth with gentle hands, then Luke's knuckles. "They didn't get near him," she said. Relief. A hard thing. She sat down carefully. Ghost slept through it, sedated and bandaged, chest rising steady under the fluorescent glow. Mark's partner took statements. The compact man said nothing. His jaw was set the way men set it when they'd been paid to forget. When the cruisers left, Sarah locked the clinic and leaned against the counter, breathing out. "They'll try again," she said. Luke didn't contradict her. He helped her move Ghost into a back room, reinforced doors, set lights low. Ranger took position at the threshold, a sentry with fur silvered by years. Dawn came pale. News trickled, no lab employees found, records wiped. Mark returned with coffee and the look of a man choosing sides. "County can't hold him," he said of the attacker. "Charges'll slip." Luke understood the shape of that sentence. He looked at Ghost, at Sarah, at Ranger. The ledger closed another line. "Then we move him," Luke said. "Somewhere quieter." Sarah nodded. She had already packed a bag. Luke drove north at first light, the sky thinning from slate to pearl as the truck climbed out of Durango and into a long, patient quiet that felt earned. Snow fell less like an attack now and more like a promise kept soft flakes settling on the hood and on Ranger's dark coat as he watched the road with an old soldier's calm. Ghost lay on a padded pallet, in the back leg splinted and wrapped, breathing deep and even. The dog's sable fur had been brushed clean, his eyes clearer than they'd been since Luke first cut him free. They took back roads until the mountains widened and the air tasted like pine and cold water, until the town signs grew sparse and the land began to feel less interested in keeping secrets. The place Luke chose sat outside Bozeman, Montana, a modest spread he'd bought years earlier because it didn't ask questions. A weathered cabin with a tin roof, a barn that leaned but held, and a ring of cottonwoods that broke the wind like old friends. Eleanor Brooks met them at the gate, a woman in her late 60s with a strong back and silver hair worn in a single braid down her spine. Eleanor had a farmer's hands, broad-scarred, steady, and a face that had learned humor as a survival skill after losing her husband to a winter heart attack. She ran a quiet network that fostered retired working dogs, no paperwork beyond trust, no signs beyond a hand-painted board that read, "Welcome," as if that were instruction enough. She took one look at Ranger, nodded in recognition, and crouched to meet Ghost at eye level, voice low and kind, offering a piece of dried venison without hurry. Ghost accepted, then leaned into her palm, as if he'd been waiting for that touch his whole life. Sarah arrived that afternoon, driving her own truck, hair freed from its knot and blowing like she'd finally let herself breathe. She walked the property with Luke eyes cataloging light and space, and when she saw the barn she smiled a small, real smile that lived longer than fear. They settled into a rhythm that felt less like hiding and more like choosing morning checks, slow walks for Ghost Ranger supervising with grave approval. Sarah setting up a temporary clinic corner, sleeves rolled, hands competent and gentle. Eleanor telling stories that stitched laughter into the hours. News came when it needed to, charges, stalled investigations, opened a lab, shuddered under scrutiny. It couldn't dodge. Luke didn't celebrate. He exhaled. Weeks passed. Ghost stood again, awkward at first, then proud, learning how to place weight without flinching. One evening, as the sun slipped gold behind the cottonwoods, Ghost padded to Ranger and touched noses, a quiet ceremony, then lay down at Luke's feet. Luke felt something in his chest loosen the old knot, remembering how to open. He built a small fence, not to keep dogs in, but to keep the world from rushing them. He fixed the barn roof with Eleanor's advice and Mark's borrowed ladder when the deputy visited on leave. Beard Fuller smile easier now that the ledger was lighter. Sarah stayed, not as an answer to anything, but as a person who had found a place where her hands could do good without apology. On the first truly warm morning, Ghost trotted across the yard, legs steady, ears high, chasing nothing but joy. Ranger watched, tail thumping, once a verdict delivered. Luke laughed out loud, the sound surprising him, and the mountains kept it. Sometimes they arrive on 4 paws in quiet choices in the moment a tired heart decides not to walk away. This story is not about a Navy SEAL or a German Shepherd or even a rescue. It is about the kind of grace God places in ordinary days, when courage shows up as patience, when love looks like staying, and when protection comes from hands that are willing to get cold, tired, and afraid for someone else. In daily life we pass crossroads just like Luke did. A moment to help or to hurry on, a chance to protect the vulnerable or to stay comfortable. And again Scripture reminds us, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." What we choose in those quiet moments is often where God's miracles begin. If this story touched you, let it be a reminder that kindness is never wasted, loyalty still matters, and God is near to those who refuse to abandon others in their darkest hour. Please share this story with someone who needs hope today. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from or who you're praying for. And if you believe in second chances, in unseen protection, and in love that shows up when it's hardest, subscribe to the channel and walk with us in these stories. May God bless you, keep you safe, and fill your days with quiet miracles you don't even realize are happening yet. Amen.